question for Rod. I'm guessing the Commitment Sundays, on a Sunday, sorry.
We had Saturday night church as well, so it was for us it was a weekend, but generally it's a Sunday.
Okay, because I was just more curious about how you thought about running those services with non-Christians, and perhaps even thinking about Christians who've come from perhaps a charismatic church where they really gripe against that kind of public call. Keen to get your thoughts on how to engage with people who are outsiders experiencing that service.
Oh well, I mean, I would taking up Chris's thing about being bold and brazen. I don't necessarily think it's against having a gracious, intentional way to ask. I'd probably, as far as the outsiders were concerned, be just simply saying, look, this is our day for our people. If you don't know Jesus yet, we hope you do, but you don't have to feel a compulsion to give it all. But we've actually got to we're raising the ministry for these sort of things, and so I just go on and do it. The other ones were other Christians or something. Yeah, well, I'm an Anglican, and I think the charismatic movement to me is about as wide as the Anglicans. You can have people from one extreme or another, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. I think it's all about your own personal relationships with people, your own integrity, and the trust that you build up, and the asking has got to be undermined by trust. So one of the things that I would be always saying is that whatever you're doing in the church, you do what you say you will do. And the more you do what you say you will do, the more people trust that you will do that, and and the more you just are conducting a good ministry, and so that they see that you're a person of integrity, and then when you ask, they know that there's no dodgy things happening. But obviously that takes a sort of a track record, and you've just got to be continually building up your track records. In fact, I've heard Rick Warren say that when he did his first big major fundraising, he'd been putting cookies in the cookie jar for about 15 years, and then he was able to take them all out at one time. But he just built up that track record of good gospel ministry at a whole range of levels. Yeah.
Just a question about, it's great to see how you wrote a list of all of the people and work out what you could do, and I'm just wondering if you have different strategies for the categorizations. Like, if you've gone to that level of categorizing the people that you're wanting money from, like Chris, you talked about whether they're inside or outside or grant people and so on, but I mean even within your own congregation, whether you've categorized them by like their capacity or even in their intentionality. So like if you've got like large donors or medium donors or smaller ones, but then even their intentionality, are they people that you've got to sort of break their arm to get them to give because they haven't got there yet? Or are they people that just love giving and you've just got to try to get more of their pie? Like, do you have different strategies for that?
No. That's a good idea. Yep. No, we haven't kind of broken down inside the church those who have different capacities, or we know the people at church who have jobs. So they're like get a bit of a harder ask, and we do know those who have better jobs. So in Foster there's like kind of hospitality jobs, or there's like medical or teaching jobs, and it's pretty clear as to who's got what kind of job. And I do make sure I have conversations with those who are steadily employed about our ministry plans, because I like to particularly keep them well informed. And say one of the guys at church who's just a retired doctor, I invited him along to the meeting just to talk to the guy about the land, because he knew him as well. So I'll come along, and so he's kind of at ground zero now in our conversations with the guy who owns land, because I wanted him to be on board. Yeah.
So that's like categorising as their ability to be able to give.
Yeah, we haven't kind of formally done it. I think I just
what about the intentionality of their giving? like whether they're people who are already committed givers or whether you've got to twist their arm to get them? Like their maturity,
only our
the maturity of
treasurer
giving.
at the moment. Only our treasurer knows the names of those who regularly give, but I do regularly write to the people who have indicated. We have formal membership at church, and one of the things is we want our formal members to partner financially, and so I do write to that smaller group quarterly with the ministry plans and where the budget's at, and inviting them to increase as they're able. So that there are formal members who are partners, and we want to make sure that they're partnering financially too. So that's the only kind of category we really have formal members or not. But I do need to work, that's good, more intentional about who may have a bigger capacity to give to.
Rod, I wonder if you could, I guess speak a bit more fuller about the issue of favoritism. So the whole question of, knowing how much someone gives. You talked about actually going through those pledge cards. So there's a sense that you...
Well, really the only reason I went to the pledge cards was really to sift out people for parish council. I was very conscious of that, and I suppose if there are others that were less thought it was going to be a real problem, or maybe they would reassess, but it never really struck me as a huge issue. And I did have an issue at one stage where one of the largest donors of the church wanted me to take a different course of action. I wouldn't do it, and he withdrew his money, and that was his choice. So I was rather conscious of that. But going back to the question about segmenting, like Chris, I didn't formally segment them, but I started a business group, and I started in my home because business people have a range of issues. They're often time poor and cash rich. And so I wanted to get them together, and I wanted to help them, from a Christian perspective, build their business. And so I drew up a list of these people. We had speakers every couple of months, and I would regularly go and visit a male, normally 3 or 4 weeks, 3 or 4 times a week, different ones of course, for lunch. I'd take them out for lunch. Treasury gave me a luncheon account. I never asked them particularly for money, but what I wanted to do was to make relationships with these people, and I always took some form of gift that would, normally a tape or a book or something like that, that would help them either in their spiritual life or in their business life. And so by doing that, day after day, week after week, I made a relationship with a lot of people who could generate a lot of excess cash. So at the end of the year, when I had a commitment day, all those people were, we're ready to go. But it wasn't that I'd particularly asked them. I did gather them together occasionally, on a couple of occasions when we had the big building funds, and so I gathered some of those people together and asked them specifically. But in the general course of things, I was trying to minister to them. Yeah.
I definitely agree with what you have both actually said about the minister taking the lead in terms of resourcing the church and resourcing ministry. A question about, I guess, the role of the treasurer and where you'd see their place in terms of, I guess, both informing and motivating the congregation. Would you have a joint presentation at the front of a church during a Sunday, or is more the minister taking that position and the treasurer doing things behind the scenes? So kind of that question of what's the, where do you see the role of the treasurer in this, as well as presenting some of those things about the finances and the updates and things like that?
Chris, do you want to go first?
Say at our AGM or our Dream and Scheme Day, I always do the vision presentation and then say here's how it's going to be costed, and then the treasurer might say here's the breakdown. If you've got questions about the details of the budget, you can talk to the treasurer. If you've got details about the strategy, let's talk about that with the staff and the admin committee. So the treasurer really just explains here's how many beans we have, here's how we're spending the beans, he's the bean counter, and if you've got questions about detail, he's available. So we get him up there so people know who he is.
Yeah, look, broadly I would agree with Chris on that. Fig Tree was slightly different because our treasurer happened to be the most influential and powerful layman in the church. and he was evangelistically motivated. I mean, he went to America with me. I took him to Willow Creek. We went to Rick Warren's church. We did a church crawl. He absolutely loved Rick Warren's church because the offertory baskets were like washing baskets. So he was a little bit different in that I could actually and he could speak as well. So I could put him up on critical issues where maybe I needed the church to understand that this wasn't just my latest, drink of firewater or something like that. And he tended, when Alan tended to say, look, friends, I think we can do this, people would just say we'd do it. If he ever said, I've got a bit of a problem with this, I never let him do that in front of the congregation. He always did that to me and always changed my plans. So I think it really depends on the particular person, and sometimes treasurers can get to themselves inordinate power because they control the money. But broadly, I thought Chris gave a brilliant answer. Yeah.
My question is about how you get insight into, especially with big projects, what your church might be capable of right from the outset. What potential can we do in terms of large projects?
Yeah, when I was writing the book, I researched this a little bit, and I got one book where a guy had analysed 50 projects. This is Americans, but I can't see. I know difference between America and Australia, but I can't see why it would be different on this particular issue. And he was saying that you can get sometimes between about 1 times the last year's annual budget. See, I'm talking about a 3-year giving campaign. When you're doing the big stuff, I did 3-year campaigns. The Pentecostals do the end of finance. They've got a different deal altogether. But going into the way they do it is, we could do that later. But for a 3-year campaign, you normally can budget on getting something between like 1 times last year's budget or up to 4 times last year's budget. But ours was about 2.3, that sort of figure, and that I think is reasonable. It needs to be done well, and when you get up to the high side of that multiplying factor, it's when you've been able to actually get some big donor in the church to put in a big chunk of money. Now, when I did mine, I had no idea how to ask the big donors, so I never actually did it. When I researched the book, I went and researched a lot of ways in which people actually did approach big donors and say, show me the money, so to speak. So I would think that if you've got a budget, for argument's sake, what people want to know, if you've got an annual budget of 200,000, is it realistic to set a building project of 2 million? Well, yeah, it is. But you could set a building project of maybe, of 600,000 or something like that, and you might have a realistic chance of doing something about it. Yeah, so it's that sort of figure. Do you want to add to that, Chris?
Reporting on giving through the year to congregation, Rod, you said, you don't want it to be just about money. We don't want to see thermometers and graphs and things like that. So at Fig Tree and then maybe at Coast, other than at your AGM, what does it look like to keep people informed about how giving?
I would give it in terms of a ministry update. Okay, so I don't give them a money update. I give them a ministry update, and the ministry update is telling, what's going on in ministry. It doesn't have to be, or some highlights, and these sort of things have been going on, and you might list 4 or 5 or 6, and then I would say something like to achieve this. We generally need this amount of money. We're getting that much. Thanks so much for all your giving. Always thank them, and I meant it. And please keep praying about the difference. So the money was always in the context of winning people to Christ. Chris made a comment before about asking about wills. I did it in a very low-key way. I read in a book years ago about a church in New York, and I don't know whether this will solve your immediate problem, Chris, but it certainly helps on the longer term. But this church in New York started to put in the bulletin every week, please remember XYZ church in your will. And they just put it in the bulletin. Said nothing about it, nothing more about it, just did that. And nothing happened for years. But 25 years later, they were getting a bequest every week, every month. So I started to do that. I just, in the bulletin, every week. Now, I did it on, if you imagine, we had to say a 4-page bulletin, 1, 2, 3, 4, you put it on the bottom of page 3. The eyes go down to the page, go down the page, and that's where they land, you see. So I always put it down there. We wrote 4 different incarnations of this, so it wasn't just the same words every week, but it was the same message. You would be astonished at the resistance I had to putting that in. Secretaries would leave it out. They would decide that there were other things. I remember going to my secretarial staff and saying, I do not care what else goes in this bulletin, but you are going to put that in every week. One of the wardens was warden is Anglican speak for Peter and James and John type person. He was the one who wrote the 4 different incarnations because he was nervous about the same thing going in every week. But I just kept, wouldn't let it go. But now we got quite a number of bequests, and my understanding is they still have afterwards. Whether or not they have come because of that, I can't tell. But what I wanted was just drip, 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 drip. Now, I would be thinking, get the, if you want to be more direct in that, you get the most godly older person and you get a whole pile of people that you are ministering to and get the godly older person to say, this is what I'm doing with my will. I'm getting older, and I want to get the church's ministry going forward. That'd be the way I'd be having a go at it.
Sounds good. I just wrote that down in here.
Crusaders have been doing it for years. Jump on Crusaders' website. They've got a really good, helpful, bequest language. You can even have the sort of the paragraph you need to put in the will as well. They actually do will days for people, which is I wouldn't recommend a church doing that, but it's definitely a thought.
Salvation Army do it as well. They have big bequest schemes, and they have people who monitor all those things. So get onto the Salvation Army. They know how to do it.